again. In part 1 of my Poland pre-trip video, I provided an overview of the Polish Genealogical Society of Americas, or PGSA's 2019 Prussian Head-to-Toe Tour. I chose that particular tour because it provided the best opportunity of any of the others to visit the Polish areas where 3 of my great-grandparents had been born and had lived before their crucial decision to make a new home in America. In part 2, I'd like to focus on one of those great-grandparents, Sophie Nadrowska Wisztort. I'll present some of what I know about her and her family now, as well as some of what I hope to learn from the tour. Beate and Karl Schulz will be the subject of my next and final pre-tour video. To establish the time period of interest, as best I can tell, great-grandma Sophie Nadrowska made the trip from Poland to America by herself in October 1890 on the Norddeutscher Lloyd's SS America from Bremen, Germany. I found this passenger list on Ancestry some time ago. It shows a Sophie Nadrowska arriving in Baltimore on October 16, 1890. My first big break in establishing where she had lived in Poland came when I found a copy of an entry in Chicago's St. Stanislaus Kostka Parish Record Book on Family Search. Here, besides notes related to the February 5, 1891 marriage of Sophie and my great-grandfather Anton Wisztort, is recorded a gold mine of additional information, including where they were born and their parents' names. A few years after finding the marriage record, Googling great-grandma Sophie's name around on the internet, I stumbled on a footnote referencing what I believe is a letter she wrote and sent from Chicago to her parents in Poland. That footnote led me to the book Writing Home: Immigrants in Brazil and the United States. Through the PGSA, I was able to obtain a copy of Sophie's letter dated December 2nd, 1890, just 6 weeks after her arrival in America. The PGSA's website still hosts a 2001 synopsis of the book. The author Marilyn Novak explains, in the early 1890s, the Russian Tsar's censors were instructed to seize and open letters coming into the area. They removed money, steamship tickets, and leaflets promoting emigration in an effort to halt the clandestine, illegal emigration rush out of the Congress Kingdom across the border to Bremen or Hamburg, and from those ports on to the United States or Brazil. The letters were opened, emptied, stamped hold, sent on to appropriate police stations for action, and eventually stored in a warehouse in Warsaw, awaiting destruction. Novak goes on to write, in the course of his research work in 1941, a Polish economic historian named Witold Kula found many thousands of these letters in a Warsaw warehouse. He studied about 1,000 of them, taking them home and bringing them back to the warehouse. However, Kula managed to save only 367 of them. The majority were destroyed during the Warsaw Uprising. These 367 letters were later published in a work in Polish. That work eventually became the book Writing Home, and thus my great-grandmother's letter, which her family never received, miraculously survived for me to find and read these many years later. It's provided more evidence about where she and her family lived, who they were, as well as a little insight into who my great-grandmother was as a person. Reading the letter, I'm impressed by just how articulate she is and by the hope, plans, and ambition she conveys. She asks her parents to allow her sister Petra to come to America to help her start her own sewing business. But Sophie's future would soon follow a very different path when, in early February, she marries the young and promising baker, Anton or Antony Wisztort, an immigrant from Lithuania. and it's likely conditions back in Poland deteriorated even further for her family, because in July 1893, her father, mother, aunt, and several of her siblings and cousins arrived in Baltimore and New York on the Norddeutscher Lloyds SS Stuttgart. To put some flesh on the bones, here are some images of Sophie that remain. Sophie, around 24 years old. Her husband, Anthony Wisztort, around 28 years old, and their first surviving child, Helen, taken around 1893, same year as Chicago's Columbian Exposition. And here's the three of them with several other unidentified people. Maybe that older man with the mustache and cigarette is her father, and the others her cousins or siblings. Both of these photos seem to be the kind that were taken to send back to Poland to family, just to let them know that those who'd left were doing okay. And these two wonderful photos were shared by my dad's youngest sister, Mary Ann, or my Aunt Sis, who let me borrow and scan them so they could be preserved and more widely shared. And then there's our family's collection. I'm pretty sure we ended up with these pictures because my grandma, Jenny Wisztort Schultz, Sophie's last child, brought them to our house on one of her overnight visits when my brother and I were just little kids. I even have a vague memory of going through the photos with Grandma while she identified the people in them. Without saying it, I've no doubt sharing the pictures with us was her way of trying to keep the memory of all these important people alive for us and future generations. So here, arranged chronologically, as best I'm able, with mostly undated photos, are images of Sophie through her later years. Here's Sophie with her daughter Helen, who's the baby in the first two pictures, and Helen's husband Joe. Sophie sitting on a porch with daughter Helen, Joe, and Sophie's son, and my grandmother's brother Leo. Sophie and Helen visiting with her nieces Anna and Frances Wisztort. On the back of the photo is written, "At Ann's place, Maplewood, 6930. This is where Helen's cousins and Anna and Frances live." Sophie visiting an unspecified cemetery. We have a number of visiting a cemetery pictures. This was clearly a major pastime back then. Here's Sophie again in an unidentified cemetery with my grandmother Jenny, my dad and his sisters, and here, possibly on the same trip, picnicking in a shady spot. On the back of this photo is written Daddy, meaning my grandpa Paul Schultz, Babka, grandmother in Polish, and Paul Jr., my dad, Dowagiac, Michigan, 1936. Why they chose Dowagiac, Michigan to picnic and how they even got there, I'll never know, but there they were. Both of my dad's grandmothers were a big part of his life growing up. Sophie, in particular, never lived farther than a 15-minute walk or a 5-minute bike ride from my dad's family. Here's Sophie, about 72 years old, with her daughter Jenny, my grandma, and with her son-in-law, my grandpa Paul, taken in 1940, around 22nd and Halsted, where my grandparents lived. Sophie, widowed since 1911, had lived with her son Peter. Here's Uncle Pete with my grandma in a photo taken that same day. After Peter died, I believe Sophie moved in with my grandparents. Sophie, a few years later with my dad, who was home on leave from his World War II Army service about 1945, and my grandma's friend and neighbor, Mrs. Leroy, taken in front of my grandparents' home around 22nd and Halsted. This is the last picture we have of Sophie before she died about a year later at the age of 78 on August 2nd, 1946, 2 weeks after being admitted to Chicago State Hospital, otherwise known as Dunning. I'm guessing no one in the family could manage her care at home any longer. Sophie's buried next to her son Peter in Resurrection Cemetery in Justice, Illinois. A daughter, Justine, or they called her Jessie, and Sophie's husband, my great-grandfather Anton Wisztort, are also buried there, but I was unable to find their graves on my one visit there. I found the photo of Anton's gravestone in my Aunt Mary Ann's or Aunt Sis's collection. So that's it for Sophie for now. The time for my departure to Poland for the Prussian head-to-toe tour is getting closer by the minute. I'd better hurry to gather what I've learned up to now about Beata and Karl Schultz and get part 3 of my pre-trip videos made. Bye-bye.